For centuries, hanging was one of the most common forms of execution across the world. It was seen as relatively simple and an inexpensive way to carry out a death sentence, requiring only a rope, a beam or gallows, and an executioner. Yet not all hangings were the same. One of the most notorious techniques was the short drop hanging, a method that produced a slow and often agonising death. Before the invention of the more humane long drop in the 19th century, this was the standard way to execute people by hanging. Hanging as a punishment dates back thousands of years. Ancient civilizations, including the Persians, Greeks, and Romans, practiced forms of execution involving suspension by the neck. By the Middle Ages, hanging had become the main method of capital punishment across Europe, especially for crimes like theft, murder, and treason. But the way people were hanged varied greatly. In medieval and early modern Europe, most hangings were short drop hangings, a term used by later historians to describe the traditional method. Instead of falling from a height, the condemned person was either lifted off the ground or simply dropped from a small stool or cart. This technique was not designed to break the neck. Instead, it caused death by strangulation, as the noose compressed the windpipe and blood vessels. It was slow, cruel, and very public. Short drop hanging worked on a simple principle. The prisoner was suspended by the neck with a rope, usually knotted in a noose. However, unlike the later long drop, which calculated the fall to break the neck instantly, the short drop left the body only slightly lower than before. The person's feet might be inches from the ground, or even touching it lightly, forcing them to strain upward for air. Typically, the execution went as followed. Firstly, the preparation of the gallows. The gallows for a short drop was basic. Sometimes it was a beam or tree branch with a rope tied to it. In other cases, permanent wooden gallows stood in town squares. The executioner placed a noose around the prisoner's neck, tightening it so it would not slip. Secondly, the drop or removal of support. Instead of a trapdoor and a calculated fall, the condemned stood on a ladder, stool, or in a cart. When the time came, the support was removed by kicking away the stool, pulling the ladder, or driving the cart out from under the prisoner. This left them hanging, but only slightly lower than before. Then thirdly and finally, strangulation and death. Because there was no significant fall, the neck was not broken. Instead, the prisoner slowly strangled. The rope compressed the airway and jugular veins, cutting off oxygen to the brain. Death could take several minutes, sometimes 10, 15, or even 20 minutes. During this time, the body convulsed, legs kicked, and hands clawed at the rope. Witnesses often describe these scenes as harrowing. For much of history, authorities did not prioritize making executions quick or painless. The point was to punish the criminal and make an example of them. Public executions were intended to deter crime by showing the consequences in the most dramatic way possible. Short drop hanging achieved this. The condemned often writhed and struggled in full view of the crowd, reinforcing the power of the state. Moreover, it was cheap and simple. No calculations of body weight or rope length were needed. Any executioner could perform it with minimal equipment. Another reason was tradition. For centuries, hanging had been done in this way, and there was little pressure to change. Many cultures saw execution as a shameful, drawn-out process rather than a quick and clinical one. Short drop hanging was rarely a quiet affair. Large crowds gathered to watch, sometimes numbering in the thousands. In England, the area around the Tyburn Tree in London became famous for its executions, where several people could be hanged at once. Witness accounts from the 17th and 18th centuries describe prisoners twisting violently, their faces turning purple or black, their tongues protruding. Family members sometimes tried to help their loved ones by pulling down on their legs to speed up death. In some cases, executioners were bribed to do the same. Despite its brutality, this public theatre had a moral dimension in the eyes of the authorities. The condemned was expected to make a final speech confessing to their crimes, asking for forgiveness, and warning the crowd not to follow in their footsteps. By the early 19th century, reformers began criticising the barbarity of short drop hangings. The idea of making executions more humane gained ground, especially in Britain. In 1866, William Marwood, an English executioner, introduced the long drop method. The long drop used a calculated fall based on the prisoner's weight and physique, designed to break the neck and cause near instant death. This replaced the slow strangulation of the short drop. Over time it became the standard in Britain and in many other countries. However, in some parts of the world, the short drop continued well into the 20th century. Even today there are places where executions by hanging more closely resemble the old short drop than the scientifically calculated long drop. Many famous executions were carried out by short drop hanging. In 1721, the pirate Jack Sheppard was hanged at Tyburn, reportedly struggling for 15 minutes before dying. In the American colonies and later the United States, short drop hangings were common throughout the 18th and early 19th centuries. Even some mass executions used this method. During the Nazi occupation of Eastern Europe in World War II, short drop hangings were carried out in town squares to terrorise local populations. These hangings were not about swift justice, but about public humiliation and very prolonged suffering. Today's short drop hanging is remembered as one of the more brutal execution methods. It symbolises the older, more public era of capital punishment, an era where suffering was part of the spectacle. Modern sensibilities which focus on minimising pain make the method seem especially cruel. Historians studying the practice emphasise how normalised such brutality once was. In a society accustomed to public punishments, floggings, brandings, mutilations, the sight of someone strangling slowly was not shocking, but was rather expected and normal. Short drop hanging was the original form of execution by hanging, used for centuries before the invention of more scientific methods. It worked not by breaking the neck, but by slow strangulation, causing a drawn-out and public death. It was cheap, simple, and dramatic, and it served the purpose of punishment and deterrence in societies that valued this public spectacle over any form of mercy. Though it has largely been replaced by more calculated methods and scientific ones, its legacy remains as a reminder of how past societies viewed justice and punishment. Today it stands as an example of how far execution practices have evolved, from the slow, visible agony of the short drop to the attempts at instant, hidden death in more modern times. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.